In November of 2023, I started a journey. I sold basically everything I owned. I packed a backpack, bought a plane ticket to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I left the United States. Ever since then, I've been traveling full-time in Latin America. I've been traveling for a year and a half. I visited 17 cities in 6 different countries, and I've experienced a lot. I got my phone stolen in Chile. I experienced rolling blackouts in Ecuador. I got a case of food poisoning in Mexico. But aside from those minor inconveniences, it has been an amazing trip. I've seen some truly incredible sights. I've eaten delicious food. I've met wonderful people. And above all, I learned a lot. So now, after a year and a half, I want to share with you what I've learned and what I still want to experience in Latin America the next time I visit. So come along.
Thanks for clicking on the video. If you want to help out the channel and help it grow, I really would appreciate it. Click on the like button down there, the subscribe button, and the little bell next to it to be notified for when new videos drop. It really helps the channel grow. If you'd like to support the channel monetarily, I would appreciate that as well. You can leave a super thanks by clicking this thanks button here and give a small donation to the channel. I appreciate your support. So back to the video. Enjoy.
So I wanted to make this video because I have now moved on to a different part of the world. That's right, I'm still traveling full time. But since I spent so much time in Latin America, I thought that it would only be proper to make a video summing up the entire experience. Maybe you'll learn something from it, and maybe it'll inspire you to take a trip of your own. Now, the first thing I learned almost immediately is that you will need to speak at least some Spanish to travel full-time in Latin America. This might seem obvious, but it is true. Traveling here is not like traveling in Europe, for example. Well, it's not the case everywhere in Europe. In many places, a good amount of people speak English. Enough that you can probably get by in most situations with English and like a little bit of whatever is the native language of the country. Europeans, because of the nature of the linguistic diversity of the continent, they often speak multiple languages. And because English is the language of trade and finance and diplomacy, especially in Europe, it's pretty easy to find Europeans who speak English. This is not the case in Latin America, in my experience. You will certainly find some people who speak English to a certain degree. But because Spanish and Portuguese are predominant languages of Latin America, most people you find will only speak one of these. Now, I didn't travel in Brazil yet, but in my trip, I found that being able to speak Spanish was essential. Now, if you were only staying for a couple of weeks and you only visited the most tourist-friendly places, you could probably get by speaking only English. But if you're visiting for a couple of years, you need Spanish to survive. Not only that, but it will greatly improve your experience. And Spanish, for someone like me from the United States, it's the easiest language to learn and probably the most useful as well. Because there are so many Spanish speakers in the United States, you can easily find people that you can practice with, whether in person or online. And practice and conversation with other people is the number one most important thing to do to improve your skills in any language. So get Duolingo, find a friend who speaks some Spanish, get to work. I learned for about 8 months before I left for my trip, but I think I was actually ready after 6. The second thing I learned is that the only consistent thing is change. Well, what do I mean by this? Well, you need to be prepared for things to change, for unexpected things to come up, things that are out of your control. Your flight might change, it might be canceled. The country you're planning to visit might change their visa policy. You might get sick. There might be bad weather or political protest that shuts down like a whole neighborhood in the city where you're staying. These are just a few examples. So always expect change. Be flexible. Don't freak out. Have a plan B and go with the flow. Part of this is having good travel insurance. You want to have travel medical insurance policy, just in case. And make sure you do your research on this before your trip. Now, I personally use Safety Wing, not sponsored, by the way, but it is a pretty popular option for nomads, travelers. And another part to this is planning ahead, but not too far ahead, if you understand what I'm saying. Think about this situation. You booked non-refundable travel arrangements for a stay 6 months in advance. But 1 or 2 months before your stay, there is a coup in the country, or a hurricane, or the United States decides to start dropping bombs like they unfortunately do. You want to change your plans, but now you've lost some money. Certainly, not all of these situations can be avoided, but it is for reasons like this that I do not plan too far ahead. I always pay close attention to world news, the news in the countries that I want to visit, and I try to find a balance between booking early to get better prices and booking too far ahead. Not only might the situation on the ground change, but you might change as well. If you're staying in Argentina, for example, and you plan to only stay there for 2 months, but you're enjoying it so much that you want to stay longer, it's nice to have the option to change your plans without losing too much money on non-refundable reservations. And trust me, you will want to stay longer in Argentina. Argentina is fucking awesome. The third thing I learned is don't believe the hysteria. This is especially true in the United States. But if you listen to mainstream news outlets in the USA, you would think that Latin America is a total disaster, a war zone, political riots in the streets, and economies collapsing, and drug cartels, and kidnappings, and all the worst possible things you can imagine. The news is not necessarily lying, but they are choosing what to show you, and they only show you the worst possible stories. So yes, all of these things are happening in Latin America in one place or another, but you are extremely, extremely unlikely to encounter any of them during your travel. This kind of goes back to planning ahead. Always do your research about what neighborhoods are safe, what neighborhoods are not so safe, because like any big city anywhere in the world, there will be good and bad neighborhoods in Latin American cities. If you have a little common sense, the common sense that frankly you should have in any city in the world, even cities in your own country, you'll be fine. In my opinion, honestly, the worst thing that you could do is to have an opportunity to visit another country and to pass up the opportunity because of media sensationalism clouding your judgment. The fourth thing that I learned is that you should find ways to save money where you can. And this applies especially to full-time, slow travel on a tight budget, which is exactly what I've been doing. On a short vacation, you're way more likely to want to eat out at restaurants all the time instead of cooking your own food. And you're more likely to use taxis and Ubers all the time instead of taking public transit. You're more likely to take long, expensive flights to get to your destination. But when you slow travel, you have to avoid all of these money traps. And that's exactly what they are. They are money traps. Restaurants are great. You should eat out, you should experience local cuisine, but definitely not at every meal. So try to book accommodations that have kitchens so that you can cook for yourself, and you'll save a lot of money that way. Also, taking a taxi, taking an Uber, it might be convenient. sometimes, and it might be necessary sometimes, depending on your destination. But public transit is a fraction of that cost. And Latin American cities, most of them have like pretty good public transit systems. So you'll not only save money, but you'll also get to know the layout of the city much better by using public transit than using like expensive taxis all the time. And as for traveling between different cities and different countries, my strategy is always to book regionally. What does that mean? Well, say you want to visit a few different cities in a few different countries. So, say Buenos Aires and Mendoza in Argentina, Santiago in Chile, Lima in Peru, and Quito in Ecuador, and Mexico City in Mexico. To visit all these cities, you can save a lot of money if you try to visit cities in a specific order so that you can travel overland, or at least with very short flights that are less expensive. So you start in Buenos Aires. You take a cheap domestic flight from there to Mendoza. Then you can take a bus to Santiago, which saves a ton of money. From there, a flight from Santiago to Lima is pretty cheap because it's a short route and it's between two capital cities with many flights per day. Same thing for flying from like Lima to Quito, and then Quito to Mexico City. So if you travel regionally and you follow a path with the shortest travel distances, you will save a ton of money. And another way to save money that is specific to short-term rental sites like Airbnb and VRBO is to book monthly stays. Hosts will usually give you a significant discount if you book for at least 28 days. You'll often save hundreds of dollars on a 28-day stay rather than a shorter 27-day stay because of these discounts. Also, staying in a city for 4 weeks is a great way to have enough time to really get to know the neighborhood and like how the city works. If you have the opportunity to slow travel and to do it full time, I think it makes sense to stay at least this long in each city that you visit, because it's a totally different experience than staying for like just a week or a few days. And it saves you a significant amount of cash. The fifth thing is not really something that I learned, but something that I believe is really important, and that is don't be a dick. I mean, it seems simple, but it can be more complicated than you think. DBAD, or Don't Be a Dick, is an umbrella that covers many things. For example, do a little research before your visit to any country to see if there are any actions or words that would be considered rude in that country. Because while you may think that giving your taxi driver a thumbs up means thanks for the ride, he might think you're telling him to go fuck himself. So a little research can go a long way. Also, I think it is very important to know that the history that you learned in school may be very different from the history that someone else learned in another country. And they may not share the same opinions as you regarding historical events or historical figures. So I experienced an example of this while I was in Argentina. So the former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, had died. And if you looked at some of the US news sources, they were reporting things like, great elder statesman who shaped the course of the 20th century. And it's true, he did shape the course of the 20th century, but in Argentina, they were not mourning the death of an elder statesman. They were literally cheering and celebrating in bars and on the streets. Why? Well, because Kissinger was the architect of many Cold War policies that led to violent coups and military dictatorships in Latin America and other places around the world. Death squads, prison camps, and civil wars. The execution or disappearing of thousands of political prisoners. So, let's just say he was not a popular dude everywhere in the world, And all of this is to say that you should be careful about assuming that everyone has the same worldview as you, and learn a little bit about the histories of the countries that you plan to visit, and how your own government may have affected those histories. History is not just words in a book, it's actual experiences in people's lives. And that's something that I always try to remember. Another part of DBAD, especially if you're visiting from a country with a higher cost of living and a higher average income, which will probably be the case if you are from the United States and you're visiting Latin America, things will seem very cheap to you. You will spend a fraction of what it would cost you in the United States to stay in an apartment or a hotel, to eat a meal at a restaurant, to take a taxi or an Uber. Just remember that it is cheap for you because you benefit from the exchange rate and the economic disparity between the two countries. Things are much more expensive, relatively speaking, for someone living in that country, earning an average wage in that country. So don't go around marveling at how cheap everything is compared to your home country. It's shitty, it's rude, it makes you look like a dick. And remember, DBAD. Now, if you follow this advice, you're going to meet so many friendly and generous people in Latin America. I know I did. And let's be honest, if you're from the United States, like I am, you already kind of have a bad reputation as a tourist. And that might not be your fault, but I think we should all do our best not to make that reputation any worse. So, those are the 5 most important things that I learned from traveling in Latin America for 1.5 years. But even after all that time traveling, there's still many things that I didn't get to see or experience. So here's what's on my list for my inevitable return visit. First off, there are countries that I have not seen at all. The largest of these countries is Brazil. Now, I'm learning Portuguese right now, and I would love to spend a good amount of time practicing it by visiting some of the many great Brazilian cities. And I also never got to visit Uruguay, Paraguay, or Bolivia, even though I spent a lot of time in Argentina, and those countries are Argentina's neighbors. So those are definitely on the list for future visits. I also didn't visit any countries in Central America, and there are plenty of those to see and experience. Specifically though, I would love to return to Argentina to visit Ushuaia, the city that's all the way down on the southern tip of the continent. Maybe take a ferry through the Straits of Magellan between Puerto Williams and Punta Arenas in Chile. Maybe take a flight from there to the Malvinas or the Falkland Islands, depending on who you ask. I've learned so much about them from my time in Argentina, and it would be really, really interesting to actually visit them. I would love to visit more places in Chile and Peru. The only chance I had to visit were the capitals of Santiago and Lima. And I'm sure that the experience of visiting smaller cities in other parts of those countries would be very different and very enjoyable. I would love to return to Mexico and visit some other cities in that huge country. I was there for 3 months, and even then, I know that I've only scratched the surface of what there is to see and do there. Lastly, I would like to revisit some of the cities that I really enjoyed the first time, to experience some of the things that I have yet to experience, to catch up with some of the friends that I made during this first trip, and to feed both the nostalgic heartache and the ever-present wanderlust that I seem to have now when I think about Latin America. Now, it's not hyperbole or cliche to say that the journey has been life-changing for me. And the journey continues. Like I said, I'm still traveling, just in other parts of the world. There's more to see, more to do, so much more. And I'll be making videos here, so subscribe if this is the first time you're visiting the channel. And if you really want to see what I was doing for the last 1.5 years in Latin America, well, there's hundreds of videos on this channel showing exactly that. But that's the end of this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something, and hopefully you'll come back for more, because there's plenty more coming. Hasta luego, amigos.